Hello and welcome to the Justice Factor. What a year it's been. The international spotlight fell on South Africa right at the beginning of 2013 as news emerged that the Olympic star Oscar Pistorius had shot and killed his girlfriend Riva Steenkamp at his house in Pretoria. Then a roller coaster followed, Nelson Mandela in and out of hospital while the world prayed for him. Of course, we had the various gates, Nkandla Gate, Gupta Gate and Malawi Gate. Now, as the elections loom closer, we have every Julius, Kenny and Mampela starting their own political parties. We have the Patriotic Alliance, the Economic Freedom Fighters, and Ahang vowing to get a good showing in the elections in 2014. Then on December 5, global icon Nelson Mandela died. What do South Africa's top editors think were the big stories of the year, and what are the implications for South Africa? My guests today are Firial Hafaji, editor-in-chief of the City Press newspaper, and Stephen Grootes, author of Essay Politics Unspun and presenter of the Midday Report on Talk Radio 702. Firial and Stephen will give us their top stories and we will get their winner of the year and their loser. In the final segment of the show, we will give you the Justice Factor's winner and loser of the year. But first, Firial Hafaji and Stephen Grootes. Guys, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming. Stephen, let me start with you. What are your top 5 stories of the year?
I think if you look at it from a political point of view, of all the stories that happened in 2013, the one thing that you could not have predicted was the sort of breakup of COSATU. It happened so quickly. It hasn't sort of happened yet in a way, but we now know, I think, that it will. But the moment, that night, when Zwelinzima Vavi was suspended by the Central Executive Committee, and you suddenly realized the splits in COSATU were so big and so great that they can't be overcome. And that, for me, I think, was the story that if you'd asked me at the beginning of 2013, could I make one prediction, I would never have predicted that was coming.
Firial, would you agree with him that it's the big story of the year politically?
No, I don't, but obviously for our country it's very significant. I also am not sure what Stephen says is right. I think that there's going to be an earnest move to pull Zweli Vavi back inside the tent, and you saw some of that happening around the morning for Madiba.
Stephen, let me come back to you. Give me your other 4 and then we'll go through them one by one.
Well, of course, in Nkandla, the story that just simply won't go away. For me, the Zuma spy tapes, and the moment that President Jacob Zuma's lawyers indicated that they would absolutely oppose any move to release those tapes. Those, for me, were 2 crucial moments around the president. I think also the Democratic Alliance gets into the top 5 this year. Just, in a way, it's not an event, but it's the discussion around them and how much everyone was interested in their discussions around black economic empowerment and affirmative action. And I thought that was really very important. And then, I suppose, and it's a long-running trend, but we've seen the political conversation in South Africa change a little around President Jacob Zuma, and it sort of culminated in the booing at Nelson Mandela's at the National Memorial Service for Nelson Mandela. That booing, again, I think caught many people by surprise, and I thought that was really very important.
Firial, before we get into Stevens, what are your top 5, 6
well,
stories?
Mine is definitely Nelson Mandela. I think he bookended our year. He got ill almost at the end of last year, and that was the story that ran with us. We went to the edge of the precipice, got very nervous many times, and then finally in December he died. And I think that's going to, it provoked a moment of introspection and reflection that has become a story in itself. I've never seen something like that, not only here but overseas as well. Many top foreign writers, Tom Friedman, saying that not only was he the great South African leader of the time, but he was the great leader of our time. And they compared him with almost every sitting head of state who came up very, very wanting. And then obviously Oscar Pistorius, the fall of a big hero for me. Strikes, another huge one, took down growth in the 3rd quarter to 0.7%. Really hurt our economy.
0.9% in the 1st quarter.
So that was quite very hard. E-tolls, again, ran with us right until the end of the year when they were finally implemented. We'll see how many people have actually signed up. And then the Red Berets, a big political phenomenon. The coming of the EFF and Ahang, I think, might alter our political landscape. Certainly going to be big news in the run-up to the election. And then just 2 foreign ones, but I'd like to do more later, is Malala Yousafzai. I think a really lovely, inspirational young figure. And then Twitter was listed, showing how much it's become a big part of our lives, certainly of mine, and I'm sure yours.
I mean, on Twitter, I have to say, I mean, the whole process since Nelson Mandela passed away, right up to his to the unveiling of the statue at the Union Buildings, Twitter was ahead on that story.
Wasn't Twitter what you read first?
I read Twitter first, and then I went to my other sources, and it's incredible that some of the things we can talk about, because there were some of us pulled the trigger very quickly on some stories on that, and then we weren't absolutely right on those. But let's start with, there's so much to talk about. Let's start with Nkandla Gate. Nkandla Gate, Stephen, you mentioned it as one of your top stories, but it's not just Nkandla Gate, it's Malawi Gate, it's Gupta Gate, it's Jacob Zuma Gate, isn't it?
It is. You know, it's interesting that I think for both of us, the Gupta Gate happened this year, and we actually, you would have thought that it would be there.
So long ago.
I think it's a sort of long-running story that shows you that politics is stronger than the rule of law in South Africa if you are certain people. And certainly one of those people is President Jacob Zuma. And I think that the anger was such over Gupta Gate that even Gwede Mantashe, the ANC Secretary General, had to sort of harness it and sort of try and run ahead of the wave. And yet, no one was really seriously dealt with there. There were no serious repercussions for anyone. And any discussion about Zuma was
I'd like you to respond. Isn't on Nkandla Gate, though, we're seeing Thuli Madonsela has come through as a sort of hero of the nation, and she seems to have stood her ground and saying, I will release this report. And what the Mail and Guardian has written sounds like it's a pretty damning report in many aspects.
Definitely, I think the Mail and Guardian probably got hold of the version of the report which is the correct one. And what's very, very interesting for me is that I think Thuli Madonsela has managed to get many ANC supporters on her side, and certainly the larger public within South Africa. I don't think she's going to be so easily bullied as we've seen happen before.
Stephen, let's draw the line from Nkandla Gate, Gupta Gate, Malawi Gate, then to the booing at the FNB Stadium of President Zuma. Is that related? Is this a tipping point?
Absolutely. I don't know if it's a tipping point. I mean, it might be a turning point, but not necessarily for Zuma. The way I sort of see it is that booing happened in a particular context. If we hadn't had Nkandla hogging the headlines as it did for the 2 weeks before, and don't forget the attempts by the security cluster ministers to stop the report being published and given to the implicated and affected parties in the first place, we would never have had the booing. And I don't think that the booing changes anything in terms of the electoral maths in the ANC or in the country. It doesn't mean that there are more people who are opposed to Zuma than there were before the booing. What it tells us, though, is that people are frustrated and they feel they've got no way to change what's happening. They can't affect any of the events in our politics, and so they literally broke all the rules because the rules don't work for them. And so they then booed the president at this really very important event, and I think that's important.
No, I don't. I think we always boo and are quite a chattera,
even at a
cheeky
funeral?
bunch of people.
I agree with him on the funeral. It's always been my uncle George, who drinks too much, always says the wrong thing. At the funeral, you just boom, you wait and.
Of course, but also I think that South Africans are inevitably more cheeky, more outspoken, and more say your say than people give us credit for. And I think if you've been caring to watch the polling, if we'd been caring to listen at more rallies, we might have found that actually it wasn't that surprising. What struck me, though, was it was so karmic, because it was our president who has inculcated this newish culture into the ANC of booing and recall and of quite an ugly rhetoric, and it came right back to bite him at such a crucial moment.
I mean, I thought it was extraordinary. You have more than 90 heads of state, you have the world's media, the whole attention of the world is on that memorial, and it happens. Do you think that he expected it?
I saw a very pained president for the rest of the week, and I'm not sure if it's because of what happened at the FNB or whether it was because he lost a comrade, and he did lose a mentor and a friend and a close comrade.
And someone wwho had also sponsored him. Nelson Mandela gave him a loan or whatever it may be, of R1 million after he was fired by Thabo Mbeki. Okay, let's move on to one more story before we go to our ad break. Shall we talk about the EFF, Firial? Is that a response to Zuma, or are we seeing a change in our landscape? Ahang, Kenny Kunene's new party?
Again, using the last 10 days as a reflection, it was for me a symbol of how on earth could the ANC kill its youth league that birthed it Nelson Mandela. I mean, its top leaders always come through there. It killed it, shunned Julius Malema, and being who and what he is, he started this thing that I think has become a movement, not just a political party. And it was symbolized by a story we did which showed that the Red Beret is sold out now. You can't get it.
You can't get a Red Beret. Stephen, you agree with that?
Yeah, no, I think uniquely among our commentariat, I almost in my head mentally write off the economic freedom fighters, and I'm probably going to regret this. But I just get the feeling that they don't have structure. And my question is, if something is supposed to happen and Julius Malema is not there, does it still happen? Now, there's some evidence now that we're beginning to see that that meeting would still happen and that gathering would still happen. But you still need structure and organization. Julius Malema took an ANC youth league that did have some structure and some organization and killed it. I mean, they're being sequestrated because he spent all the money and didn't pay it back. So how can he then create something if he couldn't even run something that was given to him? That, for me, is a question that he hasn't answered satisfactorily.
Stephen Grootes, Firial Haffajee will pick up on this point after the break. Stay with us as we continue to discuss the big stories of the year with Firial Haffajee and Stephen Grootes.
News that moves. ENCA.com.